Hey friends, it's your teen and tween librarian Rebecca, and we're back for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Last episode, Axel, the professor, and Hans made their way across the ocean on a raft with a sail made of a rug, and they're zooming across really quickly. They thought the sea was uninhabited. They thought this whole area was uninhabited. The animals had gone extinct, and yet they found one of these prehistoric fish. What other creatures will they find next? We'll find out in chapter 33. Enjoy. Chapter 33. A Battle of Monsters. I knew it. Saturday, the 15th of August. The sea retained its monotonous uniformity. There was no land in sight. The horizon seemed far away. My head was still dazed by the vivid impression made by my dream. My uncle had not been dreaming, but he was in a bad temper. He kept sweeping the horizon with his telescope and then folding his arms with a look of annoyance. I find that Professor Lidenbrock is tending to revert to his old mood of impatience, and I note this observation in my log. It required my danger and sufferings to strike a spark of humanity out of him, but since I recovered, nature has resumed its sway. And yet, what reason had he to feel annoyed? Our voyage was proceeding in the most favorable conditions that could be imagined, and the raft was moving wonderfully fast. "You seem anxious, Uncle," I said, seeing him repeatedly putting the telescope to his eye. "Anxious? No, not a bit of it." "Impatient, then?" "I've good reason to be." "But we are going very fast." "What's the good of it? It isn't our speed that's too small, but the sea that is too big." I then remembered that before we set sail, the professor had estimated the length of this subterranean sea at about 75 miles. Now we had covered 3 times that distance, yet there was still no sign of the south shore. "And we aren't going down," the professor went on. "All this is a waste of time, because after all, I didn't come all this way just to go for an outing on a pond." He called this voyage an outing, and this sea a pond. "But," I said, "seeing that we followed the course indicated by Saknussemm." "That's just the question. Have we followed that route? Did Saknussemm meet this stretch of water? Did he cross it? Has that stream we took as a guide led us astray? In any case, we can't regret having come so far. The view here is magnificent, and—" "I don't give a damn for views. I set myself an object, and I mean to attain it. So don't talk to me about magnificent views." I took him at his word, and left the professor to bite his lips with impatience. At 6 in the evening, Hans claimed his wages, and 3 Rixdollars were counted out to him. Sunday, the 16th of August. Nothing new. The same weather. The wind freshened slightly. When I awoke, my first thought was to observe the intensity of the light. I lived in dread that the electric light might grow dim and then go out altogether, but there seemed to be no reason for fear. The shadow of the raft was clearly outlined on the surface of the waves. This sea really seems infinite. It must be as wide as the Mediterranean or even the Atlantic. And why not? My uncle took sounding several times, tying one of the heaviest pickaxes to the end of a cord, which he let down 200 fathoms. No bottom. We had some difficulty in hauling up our weight. When the pickaxe was back on board, Hans showed me some deep imprints on its surface. It was as if that piece of iron had been squeezed between 2 hard bodies. I looked at the guide. "Tinder," he said. I did not understand and turned to my uncle, who was deep in his calculations. I decided not to disturb him and returned to the Icelander, who by opening and shutting his mouth several times conveyed his meaning to me. "Teeth!" I said in amazement, looking more closely at the iron bar. Yes, those were definitely the marks of teeth imprinted on the metal. The jaws which contained them must have been incredibly powerful. Were they the teeth of some monster of a prehistoric species which lived deep down under the surface? A monster more voracious than the shark, more formidable than the whale? I could not take my eyes off this bar which had been half gnawed away. Was my dream of the previous night going to come true? These thoughts plagued me all day, and my imagination scarcely calmed down after a few hours' sleep. Monday, 17th of August. Today, I tried to remember the peculiar instincts of the antediluvian monsters of the secondary period, which, coming after the mollusks, the crustaceans, and the fishes, preceded the mammals on Earth. The world belonged at that time to the reptiles. Those monsters held absolute sway over the Jurassic seas. Nature had endowed them with a perfect constitution, gigantic proportions, and prodigious strength. The saurians of our days, the biggest and most terrible alligators and crocodiles, are only feeble, reduced copies of their ancestors of primitive times. I shuddered at the evocation of those monsters. No human eye had ever seen them alive. They appeared on Earth 1,000 centuries before man, but their fossilized bones, found in the clayey limestone which the English call lias, have made it possible to reconstruct their anatomy and ascertain their colossal structure. I had seen in the Hamburg Museum the skeleton of one of those saurians, which was 30 feet long. Was I destined, I, an inhabitant of this earth, to find myself face to face with these representatives of an antediluvian family? No, that was impossible. Yet the iron bar bore the mark of strong teeth, and I could see from the impression they had left that they were conical, like those of the crocodile. I gazed in terror at the sea, dreading to see one of these inhabitants in the underwater caves leap into sight. I imagined that the same idea, if not the same fear, had occurred to Professor Lidenbrock, for after examining the pickaxe, he kept watching the ocean closely. Why the devil, I said to myself, did he have to go and take soundings? He has obviously disturbed some creature in its lair, and we may be well attacked on our way. I had to look at our guns to make sure they were in good condition. My uncle noticed what I was doing and gave an approving nod. Already the surface of the water had begun moving over a wide area, indicating some disturbance down below. Danger is near. We must keep a sharp lookout. Tuesday, 18th of August. Evening came, or rather the moment when sleep weights down our eyelids, for there's no night in this ocean, and the implacable light tires our eyes with its persistency, as if we were sailing under the Arctic sun. Hans was at the tiller. During his watch, I fell asleep. 2 hours later, a violent shock awoke me. The raft had been lifted up above the water with indescribable force and hurled 100 feet or more. "What's the matter?" cried my uncle. "Have we run aground?" Hans pointed to a dark mass rising and falling about a quarter of a mile away. I looked and cried, "It's a colossal porpoise!" "Yes," said my uncle, "and there's an enormous sea lizard. And farther on a monstrous crocodile. Look at its huge jaws and its rows of teeth. Oh, it's disappearing." "A whale! A whale!" cried the professor. "I can see its enormous fins. Look at the air and the water it's throwing out through its blowers." Sure enough, 2 liquid columns were rising to a considerable height above the sea. We stood there surprised, stupefied, horrified by this herd of marine monsters. They were of supernatural dimensions, and the smallest of them could have broken the raft with one snap of its jaws. Hans wanted to put the helm up to get away from this dangerous region, but in the other direction he saw some more enemies which were just as terrifying. A turtle 40 feet long, and a serpent 30 feet long, darting its enormous head to and fro above the waves. Flight was out of the question. The reptiles came nearer and moved around the raft at a greater speed than that of any express train, in gradually narrowing circles. I picked up my rifle. But what effect could a bullet have on the scales of which these animals were covered? We were speechless with fright. They drew closer, the crocodile on one side, the serpent on the other. The rest of the herd had disappeared. I got ready to fire, but Hans motioned me to stop. The 2 monsters passed within 100 yards of the raft and hurled themselves on one another with a fury which prevented them from seeing us. The battle began 200 yards away. We could distinctly see the 2 monsters at grips with each other. But then it seemed to me that the other animals were coming and joining in the struggle. The porpoise, the whale, the lizard, and the turtle. Every moment I caught a glimpse of one or another of them. I pointed them out to the Icelander, but he shook his head. Eva, he said. What? 2? He says there's only 2 animals. He's right, cried my uncle, whose telescope had not left his eye. He can't be. Yes, he is. The first of those monsters has the snout of a porpoise, the head of a lizard, and the teeth of a crocodile. That is what put us out. It's the most formidable of the antediluvian reptiles, the ichthyosaurus. And the other? The other is a serpent with a turtle shell, the mortal enemy of the first, the plesiosaurus. Hans had been right. Only 2 monsters were disturbing the surface of the sea, and before my eyes I had 2 reptiles of primitive oceans. I made out the bloodshot eye of the ichthyosaurus, as big as a man's head. Nature had endowed it with an extremely powerful optical apparatus capable of withstanding the pressure of the water and the depth at which it lives. It has appropriately been called the saurian whale, for it has the whale's speed and size. This one measured not less than 100 feet, and I could gauge its size when it raised its vertical tail fins above the waves. Its jaws were enormous, and according to the naturalists, they contained not less than 182 teeth. The plesiosaurus, a serpent with a cylindrical body and short tail, had 4 flappers spread out like oars. Its body was entirely covered with a carapace, and its neck, which was as flexible as a swan's, rose 30 feet above the water. Those 2 animals attacked each other in an indescribable fury. They raised mountainous waves which rolled as far as the raft, so that a score of times we were on the point of capsizing. Hissing noises of tremendous intensity reached our ears. The 2 monsters were locked together and could no longer be distinguished from one another. We realized that we had everything to fear from the victor's rage. 1 hour, 2 hours went by, and the fight went on with unabated fury, the combatants alternately nearing the raft and moving away. We remained motionless, ready to open fire. Suddenly, the ichthyosaurus and the plesiosaurus disappeared, creating a positive whirlpool in the water. Several minutes passed. Was the fight going to end in the depths of the sea? All of a sudden, an enormous head shot out of the water, the head of the plesiosaurus. The monster was mortally wounded. I could no longer see its huge shell, but its long neck rising, falling, coiling and uncoiling, lashing the waves like a gigantic whip and writhing like a worm cut in 2. The water spurted all around and almost blinded us. But soon, the reptile's death agony drew to an end. Its movements grew less violent. Its contortions became feebler, and the long serpentine form stretched out in an inert mass on the calm waves. As for the ichthyosaurus, has it returned to its submarine cave, or will it reappear on the surface of the sea? And that's the end of chapter 33.